so we'll get this started. And the first question I want to ask you is just, from your point of view, this past week, or I guess last week, with electing the speaker in the House of Representatives, can I ask what that was like from your perspective?
I thought that this was a very productive assembly of Congress. It was actually the most productive assembly that I've seen in Congress since I've been here. It may have looked messy from home, but being a mom of 4 boys, chaos and dysfunction are part of my everyday life. So this was actually quite organized to have 434 members present on the floor, debating, engaging in conversation, actually listening to the merits of the proposal, and eventually, to Speaker McCarthy's credit, agreeing to the concessions that were made that empower each individual member. This has always been about unifying the conference and being able to govern as we campaign. That's one of my frustrations, is people say one thing on a campaign trail and then get to Washington, D.C. and do something completely different. They overregulate, overtax, overspend, and destroy everything that we are working so hard to build back at home. So this right here allowed many concessions that empower us, that limit the consolidated power of the speaker and of leadership, and allow each member on both sides of the aisle to actually engage in further debate, offer amendments that will be made in order, bring legislation to the floor that we will have a vote on. And I'm very encouraged by this. I believe that this week has only made us stronger going forward.
Awesome. And so, you mentioned some of it right there with some of the concessions made and how it might have appeared messy from the outside. So what were some of the things that you and your fellow members of the House were fighting for when you were not voting for Kevin McCarthy in those first couple of votes?
For the first 14 votes, here's what that looks like. My colleagues and I worked for months to actually avoid a scene on the House floor. We wanted to keep this behind closed doors and come to an agreement before these votes started taking place, but we weren't quite there yet. Members on both sides of the aisle will be able to now file amendments to the 12 appropriations bills that'll be made in order. So as long as they cut spending, doesn't matter if it's myself, AOC, or anyone else, if one of us can find wasteful spending and submit an amendment to cut that spending, then we'll have a vote on it. Instead of these atrocious $1.7 trillion omnibus bills that are dropped on us with no time to read, we'll actually have the 12 appropriations bills passed that go through committee. They'll receive amendments and they'll have a vote. This was standard practice in Congress 15 years ago, and we need to get that back. We're going to receive votes on term limits, balanced budgets. Imagine that, Congress not spending more than they have. We'll have votes on the Texas border plan and the fair tax, just to name a few. And this means Americans will actually know where their member stands on these important issues. But also, it's really important to note that all bills, all legislation that comes to the floor will now have to be single subject and will have 72 hours to read the bill. And talk about common sense. 47 legislatures in our United States have single subject rules for their legislation, Colorado included. And now we have that at a federal level. This is something that's been talked about for decades, and we have it now. And I'm so proud to be a part of this historic change.
All right. And so I guess my next question is to try and localize this a little. So what does, these things that you and your colleagues were fighting for, what does that mean for us here on the Western Slope?
This means that you have a stronger voice because your member of Congress is more empowered to speak on your behalf, to vote on legislation in a timely manner, no more passing it to find out what's in it. There were some legislation that I took some criticism for voting against simply because it didn't go through committee and we didn't have time to actually read the legislation. I don't believe that any member of Congress should vote on something that they don't know the contents of. Now, look, we took a little extra time and we got this right. Members on both sides of the aisle, including those who were attacking us as we worked through the process, are now praising this as a win for the American people, because when each individual member is empowered their constituents are empowered. And that's what really matters, strengthening the voice of the American people. I'll still serve on natural resources, making our public lands a priority, being good stewards of our land, introducing forestry legislation that allows us to deal with the bark beetle, a situation that we have in Colorado that is left on the western United States, 6 billion standing dead trees. And we'll be able to work on legislation that combats that and actually allows us to manage the forest. There's water issues that I'm excited to be involved on in these conversations on the Natural Resources Committee. But most importantly, now it's time to get to work. We took a few extra days to make sure we got this right. And I'm so proud that we did that. Congress takes 6 to 8 weeks off every summer. So taking a few extra days in the beginning of the year to make sure we have deliberation on the second in line to the presidency is well worth it.
All right. And so I guess one of my next follow-up question there is, you mentioned, how now you and your other members of Congress feel more empowered. And you mentioned all this, you mentioned the empowerment and all this kind of stuff leading up to it. So what do you plan to do with this? We're entering now your second term, and you mentioned this empowerment. What do you plan to do? What's upcoming? What should your constituents look forward to that Lauren Boebert is going to be doing now?
My plan has always been to work hard for my constituents, and now I get to do so in a stronger, more unified Republican Party. There were many wonderful conversations that we were having throughout the week with our colleagues, and getting them to a place of understanding exactly what we were doing. And while that wasn't perceived in the votes that were taking place, many members understood exactly what we were doing and were cheering our efforts on. And now I'm looking forward to getting to work with Speaker McCarthy and with all of my colleagues to deliver for the American people. And I really do want to just take a moment and give Speaker McCarthy a lot of credit here. He deserves a little bit of a shout out. He saw the merit in our requests and accepted them. And it takes a dedicated leader to do that. Not many in power want to give up control, but Speaker McCarthy saw that these changes were about fixing a broken Congress and empowering each member. So credit to him for working on all of this for these generational improvements. As I said, this is historic, fundamental change that needed to take place here in Washington, D.C.
All right. And so I know I was told we'll only have about 10 minutes. So I'll have one more question for you, and then we can wrap this up. But, you mentioned how this is actually a good thing. And I was actually a little surprised to hear you shout out Speaker McCarthy with seeing stuff like your colleague Matt Gaetz kind of receive some pushback from other Republican members of the House. So this is, in your eyes, this whole last week was a good thing. I just want to clarify, because I feel like I've seen a lot of people say this is dysfunction, but you're saying this is a good thing. Is that right?
This is not dysfunction at all. This is the most productive week I've experienced since I've been in Washington, D.C. My constituents continuously tell me that Congress is broken. And so this last week, I joined 20 of my colleagues to engage in rigorous debate. That's what our founding fathers intended. They didn't want us to just cast our votes flippantly and anoint someone into a position. They wanted us to actually debate and decide. And that and we had that debate about what was wrong with Congress and how we could actually fix it. For years, leadership in both parties have worked to consolidate power at the top. And this last week, we broke the trend and returned much of Congress's power back to the individual member. Even CNN was saying that Democrat members think that these changes are good for Congress and good for the American people. My present vote at the end, with my 5 other colleagues who stood in solidarity on that 15th ballot and voted present as well, we were agreeing that Speaker McCarthy has made the concessions and has accepted the accountability for the responsibility he has now gained. And we are willing to work with him moving forward, because there is a mechanism of accountability that is baked into this, that we can be sure that he will not back out of his promises, that he will not try to reconsolidate that power just for himself. And, I really hope that he becomes one of the strongest speakers that we've ever had, because of our efforts in making sure we fix this broken system.
Awesome. Well, again, I assume you're very busy the rest of the day, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. So again, thanks for your time. I don't have any more questions. So
Thanks so much,
thanks again.
Michael. Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
You too.